Sam, let's hop into Nebraska here. Obviously, a lot to talk about. How would you differentiate what we saw on Saturday from an offensive standpoint from what we'd been seeing with Marcus Satterfield as the play caller? Like, what were some of the key differences you noticed?
Mixture of tempos. They hit a quick slant on a third down that I thought was nice. Hadn't done a lot of that this year. They had those little, inside, I don't know what you want to call them, quick routes, curls, stops.
Choice routes,
where,
options.
Yeah.
Search.
Yeah. Yep, there you go. Where Dylan's getting the ball out after a second and a half. I think part of what they're trying to do, and I get this, is over the course of the game, you're trying to create, okay, we're going to take this early. We're going to bring you up a little bit. Then we're going to try to go behind you. They didn't get really behind USC, which, again, has good players. USC has good players. They have good safety.
Yeah. Oh,
so,
my goodness.
they're good players. And Nebraska's faced about 4 or 5 safeties this year that are going to play in the NFL, and I think Ramsey's one of those for USC. So, trying to get things, trying to separate, get guys open. The Lindenmeyer route, Emmett Johnson on the sort of an option route. But the key was they got him isolated. They took the USC defense away from it so that if he made a move and made one guy miss, he could score. There's just little things. Certainly not everything changed or anything. That wasn't what we saw. We saw more Bonner. I think that was the season high in snaps for Bullock. Season high snaps for Emmett Johnson, which I appreciated. I think he's the best, the most complete of the back. So, I don't know that we saw a ton different, but we saw a few things. And I think on Saturday we'll see a few more.
Yep.
Wisconsin is, I don't know what they're going to do. They can do whatever they want to do. I think they are who they are, and they'll probably just come in and just do what they've been doing. I just think
now that is a very good defensive team.
Wisconsin?
Yeah,
they're good.
Yeah,
they're good. They're not hellacious pass rushers the way they have been in other years. So they've had years, obviously, when they had the Watts, when they had the blitzing linebacker. I can't remember his name. Chris Orr, who's now a defensive coordinator in the NFL. They've had some years where they're really, really good, like upfield. They had, what was the guy? Vince Beagle a couple years ago. I think that was his name.
Herbig. I mean, they've had some fellas.
They don't have that, I don't think, and so that's good for Nebraska.
Where do you want to start? Herbig, T.J. Edwards. I mean,
right.
They always have that.
And Van Ginkel, and so they've had a bunch of players like that, and I don't feel like they're quite as dynamic there.
That's because they all play for the Steelers, Sam.
Right. Part of what's catching up with Wisconsin is Paul Chryst recruiting, and people don't want to hear that up there. Just like people didn't want to hear that Frank Solich's recruiting maybe tailed off a little bit at the end when he was let go, and he was let go too soon, as was Paul Chryst. But part of what's catching up with that defense, they don't quite have the players that they did, and they don't, so they're just a little bit not quite as good as they were 4 or 5 years ago. And so Nebraska can catch Wisconsin on Saturday. I'm not saying they're going to beat them, but they're favored for a reason. And it's because Wisconsin just doesn't have quite the players that they did. And I don't know. We'll see what happens.
Hey, Sam, so we saw a lot of the similar because I do agree with you. A lot of the same concepts, just enough wrinkles, especially with the interior route concepts, like, the little choice routes and winning and man-to-man. And I felt like the changes that Coach decided to do really put a lot of the onus back on players and playing, right? Because for the last 2 weeks, we've heard him address that more now than at any point in his career. I'm still not sure Nebraska passed the players making play test. But if Nebraska doesn't have good enough players, because I kept hearing that, I'm still not sure I agree with it. Actually, I don't agree with it. They need to get better in some key spots. How do they get themselves in these positions where they take these teams down to the wire and we're still saying, we don't know the difference between execution and scheme.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll address the question this way. I do think Nebraska has pretty good players in certain spots.
Yeah.
I also feel like, to be clear, that the two teams that they've just played are talented teams. And so, it's going to require Nebraska to play really well to beat USC. It's not, and I understand that people are like, well, they're 5-5, and I get it. If you swapped Colorado and USC leagues, you would swap records at the same time. USC is a better team than Colorado, and they have better players. And so you have to play at the highest level possible. And when you get a 7-0 lead, and then you have a chance to get a pick, when Maeva is just kind of throwing the ball up there, that's a tough deal. That's, Tommy Hill kind of misplayed it. And Robinson's 6'6", and there's a great photo in the World-Herald of that play. But, there's just little things like that. You've got to find a way to make plays that they're not quite making. And their margin for error is very small. It's just very small. There's not much difference between 5-5 Nebraska and the Ohio State team that won by 4. There's not much difference. There's no difference between Kansas and BYU. The margins have disappeared. The problem with that is Nebraska can't take games off. They can't come out with a mediocre effort like they did against UCLA in the first quarter. You have to play with your hair on fire. And I think at times it's not their effort that wanes, but the quality of their execution and the quality of the decision-making on the field is just not quite what it needs to be. Dylan Raiola made some really good plays on Saturday. He made 2 plays, and he knows which ones. The lack of a dive for the first down, he slid, which he shouldn't have done, and I think he knows that. And then the interception, which was just not a good decision. I mean, that was one of his poorer plays of the year, to be honest with you, because they were moving the football, and he did not need to throw that pass in there. He just didn't.
So, Sam, let me ask you something. Coach Rule said something. We kind of glossed over it because we weren't. And I think not that we don't know, not that we weren't paying attention. It was just kind of a very vague term. He said, these are 3 winnable games. It's going to take tremendous focus. I think we maybe thought super big picture, like, hey, how are we practicing and what's our day-to-day routine? And that's all part of it. How about the focus situationally, like catching balls you get your hands on, or so I can think of 4. And the most underappreciated one might have been the scoop from Bayer, where you're thinking, if that was Nebraska, it's probably a scoop score, right? Where you scoop that thing up and he eventually gets 6 points out of it. Or the play before the sequence before Branch scored on the little quick hitter, where Nebraska could have picked the ball off a couple of times. The touchdown where Nebraska didn't intercept the ball in the end zone, because we kind of fast forward to Hartzog, but at least he plays hard. So I'm fine.
Oh yeah,
he plays
very hard.
He plays hard, and I think that can pay dividends. But anyway, having said that, just making those plays, a ball is thrown behind a player. Buddha Wright's good enough, but just situationally, it would have taken pretty high focus to know that, okay, don't panic. The ball's behind him. I'm worried about where Lemon is because I'm in man-to-man. The ball is thrown right to me, right? So sometimes you have to be in those situations. Sometimes you just have to make a play. Where do you draw that line, though, when you're looking at focusing and what Coach Rule meant by it?
I would also substitute in the word awareness. So, the idea
is it situational? Because sometimes you have to be in it.
Mm-hmm. I think some of it is situational awareness.
Okay.
Those you build a body of knowledge over time.
Yeah.
Over the course of many years, and for example, I think Dylan Raiola knows better next time that when he's in that situation to dive instead of sliding. And it's the slide thing is tricky because a lot of players just forget. Oh, when I slide, it's where the ball's at.
We see it cost quarterbacks every time. I watched it twice in the Steelers game.
Yeah, happens all the time.
Yeah. It happens a lot. And then, like kickoff return awareness, the mistake that Barney made at Indiana. He probably won't make that mistake again, but he made it there. Little things like that, I think just a kind of awareness of. Now, here's the flip side of the coin. Brian Buschini had a really good game, and to his distinct credit, what he has learned is you'll sacrifice a yard or two on the depth to get the direction. It's not about the yardage; it's about preventing a return, and he did a really nice job of preventing a USC return. He hasn't always done that. Like, that wasn't necessarily in his repertoire last year, but he had a great game. Then you have situational awareness of, like, you don't catch a punt on the 5, you probably try to get over and do the center field thing when the punt's going to land at the 12. But maybe Garcia Castaneda was instructed to do something different. It's hard for me to say. So there's a lot of different moments like that in the course of a game, and that's what makes football cool, because it stresses your mind and your body probably in a totality, in a unique way. And I haven't done any of that since high school, and I was a scrub when I did. But the collegiate players spend a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of thought about how they're going to execute a certain play, and that's just the way it goes down. I think Dylan's still growing as a player. He's growing. He's still learning how to process everything that's in front of him, and as he gets older, he will improve. One thing that I will just say about Dylan: think about this as a 4-year journey, and if you're worried about not getting out 3, don't worry about that. Think of it as a 4-year journey. Wherever that journey takes you, think about 4 years instead of 3. You look at a guy like Bo Nix in the NFL, and Bo Nix is a good athlete, but it took him 5. And then he got out, and now he's in the NFL, and look at what he's doing, and it looks pretty darn good. Jaden Daniels took 4. You don't have to turn this thing into, I was here for 3 years and then I got out. Like, you look at the collegiate journey as a 4-year journey, so that when you get in the NFL, you are prepared for everything that you're going to see, and you're not overwhelmed. Drake May is overwhelmed, for example, and he only started for 2 seasons. So little things like that. I think if Raiola is patient, he's going to really like where he's at one day, and he needs to try to not, because I know there was a lot of talk, it's going to be 3 years and he's out. Don't think of it that way. Like, this was a good year, but I think he can have an even better year next year, and he's a 4-year player. Think of it that way, as opposed to the 3-year plan. 3-year plans are for corners. That's what I say.
Sam,
or receivers. Jeremiah Smith could go to the NFL tomorrow, right?
Sure, yeah.
And it'd still take him a year to adjust.
Yeah.
But quarterbacks
maybe. Receivers seem to transition pretty quick. Now, it's kind of weird how that happens.
Yeah, I think the further
Remember
away...
how we hit that little lull from like 13 to from like 12 to 16 or 17? We're like, it takes receivers a little bit of time to recover.
Nah, not anymore.
Nah, man, these guys, they just come into the league now and just do work.
Start balling. Sam, want to fast forward to Wisconsin this week. I think sometimes as Nebraska fans, we kind of get a little tunnel vision and think that, we're the only ones kind of going through it. Wisconsin going through it this year as well. Obviously, they're onto a backup quarterback. They just fired their offensive coordinator. How do you kind of process the turmoil Nebraska's going through versus a team like Wisconsin who, they're firing that OC. They don't even have the bye week to kind of figure that out.
Yeah, Nebraska went through what Wisconsin's going through now 20 years ago. So Wisconsin's walking the path that Nebraska did, and I just don't know if Wisconsin's going to have any better result than Nebraska did. Wisconsin fired a guy probably too soon. He got crossways with the AD for some reason. I don't really know why. And then they hired a coach who, again, they decided not to hire Jim Leonard, the defensive coordinator, and kind of keep the Alvarez family going. So they go outside of that and they hire Fickle. And then Fickle decided, for reasons that maybe he can only explain today at his press conference, to hire a guy he'd never worked with to run his offense. And it didn't work. I don't think the two of them got along. I've kind of followed the coverage up in Madison. I don't think the two of them really liked each other very much. I don't think that the offense really worked.
Yeah, boy.
It's not that offense can't work. I think they tried to run the ball. I think they had some nice concepts against Nebraska last year that I was impressed by, but it just wasn't coalescing. And the reality is up there, the talent's just not what it was. They don't have as many elite players. And so what's happening right now was probably going to happen all along, but they probably should have kept Chris for another year and then brought in a coach and made it a little bit cleaner, made sure that Chris failed all the way, and he hadn't really done that. So that's probably the way I would have handled it, but they did what they did. It's a little different because, again, their offensive coordinator, I feel like, was not really on the same page as the head coach. Whereas with Rule, I just think it was evident that things weren't going to go the way they needed to go with Satterfield. So, but they're very close. So I think there's a little bit of difference there. But Nebraska's, both teams are hungry. They both need a win. They both play rivals next week. And this is probably the game for Nebraska. It's got to be an all-in, put all the chips to the center of the table kind of experience on Saturday. Not because you can't beat Iowa. You can. I mean, Iowa can beat itself, but it's very challenging.
Sullivan's done for the season, too.
So they're going to be down to a third-string quarterback.
Yeah, so it's very hard to go into Kinnick Stadium at night there and beat them. Teams don't do that. It doesn't happen very often. So you have to know that if you're going to go do that, you're going to have to play the best game of the season, of your year, of the tenure. And, you may as well just do that this week at home. You may as well play your absolute A game at home. And you know what? If Nebraska plays its A game, they're going to win. If they play their A game at Iowa, I don't know. But if they play their A game on Saturday, if they play the way they played against Ohio State on Saturday, they're gonna clinch a bowl. So that's what they've got to try to do, is play the absolute best football they can.
Sam, let me ask you something. Do you get the sense that Nebraska is close enough, and maybe outside of just playing in all these one-score games, where you can take temperaments of guys like Lloyd and Bonner and Emmett Johnson and say, you know what, let's go with they play hard. Like, are they a play hard kind of team yet?
They certainly can be, yeah. Yeah, there's guys out there that really want to play hard and try hard, and Emmett Johnson's probably leading the pack there. Straight effort guy. Yeah, I think they can play. They play hard. Yeah. They don't run quite as well on defense as they did last year. Last year's defense was kind of played out of its mind at times, and I thought the level of effort and hustle was almost maniacal.
Yeah.
They're not quite that way this year. I'm not sure why. I think that's something they'll have to examine in the offseason. Secondary maybe isn't quite as good. They're just not quite as maniacal as they were last year, and I think you see that at times. But yes, this team can play hard, and I think they can win on Saturday. I think it's a really important game for the Rule era. I think everybody knows that, but play like it. Play your absolute best game right from the start, right from the starting kickoff. Don't waste any time. We'll see what happens.
That's Sam McKewon from the Omaha World-Herald. Sam, we appreciate it as always. We'll talk to you next week.
Take care.